Alrighty, so we will continue to add people to the meeting, but want to be super respectful of everyone's time. So again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, based on where you're calling in from. We've been able to adapt, and I think that community is more important now than ever before. Many of you have been with me on this journey since I first started Zendesk, and you've all heard the story of, you know, starting in San Francisco, to more people, more pizza than people. Then we go to New York, then we go to EMEA, right? So, you know, as you can see with this dope graphic Brad built, you know, let's simplify it up, right? You know, in an effort to continue to get better each day. So a little bit about community building and kind of how we're thinking about it going forward, right? We've got the idea of these meetups, and they're an amazing way to magnify leaders' voices within the community. So there's great learning at scale. And then you've also heard me, you know, talking about Slack, which ultimately is, in my mind, real-time engagement. Let's get your questions answered, and let's get you building dope stuff. Very technical with the word dope there. You know, and again, we can't build community without amazing, you know, speakers, customers, and more importantly, you know, friends. So I think that should kick things off here. And again, huge thank you to Brad, and I'd like to hand it off to you.
Great, thanks, Greg. So today I'm thrilled to be joined here by Niels and Anand from Segment. Well, Niels from Tray and Anand from Segment. We're going to talk about how these two great companies discuss their customer journeys, how they think about it, and hopefully we'll get a good inside look into some of the tools and tricks they're using to get ahead. For starters, I want to give them both a chance to introduce themselves. Niels, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, yep, my name is Niels Fote. I am the Director of Growth here at Tray. I'm also a former customer of Tray's when I used to work at New Relic, where I headed up their self-service program. I've since moved on to Tray, and I'm doing a lot of similar work over here now, and a power user of the platform, and excited to speak with you all about some of the things we're up to, and hopefully you'll find something practical that you can apply to your own businesses.
Awesome. Hey everyone, my name is Anand, and I've been at Segment for about 3 years now, and have been running the startup program at Segment for the last year. It's been a real pleasure to get to work with, really at this point, thousands of startups, either directly or indirectly. I'm also a mentor at 500 Startups and at GSV Labs, so love to get to learn about what startups are doing and aggregate that and use that to help other people to achieve their goals. So really excited to share that with you today.
Great, thanks guys. I'm going to skip forward to talk a little bit about our agenda. We've got a lot to cover today, but you know, kind of to set things up, you know, if you think about Zendesk as being your customer communication and engagement platform, I think what's great about this discussion is that Tray is the tool that helps you easily connect the data from that platform and into Segment, where the information is combined with other tools, other applications you're using, and you can really centralize your data and help you make better decisions with all that information. And overall, I think the ease and cost effectiveness at which this can be done today really gives startups a huge advantage when it comes to creating customer experiences. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do that, and a bit about how startups can set that up from the start. So we'll jump into the agenda here, and starting out with creating a plan. And my question for you guys here is, you know, when we start to head down this path of product market fit, what are some of the examples of ways to implement and discipline in your tracking? Does it require expensive software? What are some of the things you're doing there? And you know, what are basically the things you're thinking about at a high level in terms of setting up a funnel on day one?
Yeah, I mean, so that question for me, it comes down to what really is tracking, what really is all of this. And at the base of it all, it's all storytelling. So if you're looking at what your metrics are supposed to be showing you, what your tracking plan is supposed to be used for, it's to help you understand what is the story of your customers, of your users. And after it's all happened, how can you recreate that and help yourselves to understand that story? So I threw up some things here as a way of re-looking at the customer journey and re-looking at creating a tracking plan. Here you have the customer journey and you're looking at the major points of it, understanding what each parts of those stories are and why they're important to you. This can be from a business standpoint, understanding your customer, to understanding who's going to be your best user and what's happening right before someone pays you or upgrades a subscription. Those are all just parts of this customer journey or this story. And if you take that and boil it down to its base common denominator, that's really what a tracking plan is. So although, especially for people that might not come from a technical background, it seems very complicated and convoluted. It's really pretty simple if you start to think about it in terms of stories. And that's really something I want to help people to understand, that it's not just data and numerical analytical things, but it's also this more squishy qualitative journey that we're understanding. And putting that all together is really the end result of going to that story in the beginning. It's kind of a circle. So that's what I really think about all of it is it's not complicated if you just take it down to its base story and what things you need in order to create that story again once it's already happened. Yeah, and Niels, do you have anything to add to that or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say like it's important to get into the discipline of tracking, and you don't have to overcomplicate things to start. In fact, like I've been a segment customer longer than I was ever even a trade customer, and you know, some of the points you're making here I think shouldn't be undersold, right? On just like taking a simple sort of approach to stuff, using very human readable naming conventions, like just really simple things like this of like anybody can look at a piece of event data and, you know, if they have any context about the business at all, understand what it means. So, you know, it can be as simple as, you know, your clickstream data, just understanding, you know, where in a product they're using a certain feature, making sure that you have just real basic properties attached to your events, so that you can segment your data in quick and easy ways. Like at New Relic, every event that we tracked with our to understand again what people are doing at different points in the journey had properties of which product does this apply to, which category of features, you know, does this particular feature sort of group into, and you know, just those simple two little things, right? What product, what feature, human readable event, makes it the data far more accessible and easy to use across different people in the organization, because everybody comes in at different times. You know, your business grows, people come in, and just being able to hit the ground running and use that stuff by getting into the discipline of tracking early on, is a skill set that sort of permeates the culture if you make it important early. And so I just say, like, start early, start simple, and, you know, don't be afraid to refine it as you go.
That's a really great point. And one thing I'll add to that is, to your point, many people go a little bit crazy with tracking at the beginning. They think more is better, or we can just collect all this data and we'll figure out what to do later. It's really not necessary. So to Neil's point, for example, you know that someone churned if you have a payment made event coming in that you're tracking, and someone has had that event month over month, and you have a subscription business, and then 1 month they no longer have that event come in. You don't need to have a churned event necessarily for that. So simpler is better. The lack of something can tell you, just like we know in surveys, right? The lack of response can tell you more than even the response itself or the event. The lack of an event can tell you that part of the journey as well. So that simplicity is really important.
And that's one of the questions I wanted to ask was, you know, in some of my experiences, I've I've actually tried to track everything, thinking that someday some of this information might be useful, and obviously you end up just collecting a bunch of data that you never end up using. That said, are there times when you've learned things that you weren't expecting, or I mean, at this point, is it pretty easy to define what you're looking for up front? And you've done this enough times that you have a pretty good sense of that, or are you still discovering some things here and there from accidents in data collection maybe?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. So certainly, like, having certain skill sets helps you have these sort of like positive accidental discoveries. And so I guess the way I would sort of take this question is to say, like, there are certain disciplines that I think should be taught that should be learned more broadly across organizations. I guess I should say that. So like I self-taught myself SQL maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. And it really came with our adoption of Segment. Like we had done we had instrumented, probably over instrumented, just like, we're talking about here. But in order to be able to understand our data, adopting that skill set allows you to marry that with skills you may have already come to the table with, right? And so what I see is a greater blurring of the lines between technical disciplines and people in the business or whatever side of it is. And I think that's going to become more and more important as data becomes cheaper, as tools like Segment and Zendesk and Tray are sort of adopted more broadly, and these platforms are more open, and we all have access to these data. Having those skill sets within more people within the organization is really critical, because you can make those accidental discoveries, and people can self-service. And what I've sort of called is this, what you'll see oftentimes in some organizations as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, is people have what's called like I would call a learned helplessness, where they learned that they don't have access to certain things and tools, and by teaching themselves and making it, again, like a cultural precedent that we're going to blur some of these lines, then you have some of that magic happen where more and more people have access to these powerful platforms like Segment and Tray and Zendesk, right? And they can do more by learning those skills and run into those accidents. So I know that's not a specific example, but I think it's important because we shouldn't be afraid of teaching, like learning these technical skills just because we're not an engineer or an analyst or anything like that. It's all very possible. All the information's out there on the web, and the tools and data are cheap, right? And so that shouldn't stop you.
Yeah, plus one to that, I have a BA in sustainable development and taught myself SQL about 2-3 years ago as well, for exactly the purpose that you're talking about, that data democracy that's evolving in modern tech companies. Another thing I wanted to add, kind of as part of your question, Brad, was, are there kind of familiar things that you should just expect to start tracking right out the gates? I think that generally speaking, the advice I would give is track your funnel, something for top of funnel, something for middle funnel, something for bottom of funnel, and then something for revenue overall. So, you can find what parts of the customer journey for your own business are appropriate for those 3 parts of the funnel. Usually it's going to be site visit, trial started, and then subscription created, and then like recurring payment made, something like that. But that would be individual to your own business. But that's the general advice I would give, and my gut reaction to seeing a model.
Great, and that's a great segue into my next question, which was about setting up your funnel. And would love to hear a little bit about your respective funnels, how they're set up, how they might have evolved, and some of the things that you're doing with the information you're collecting from those funnels.
Sure. I can go here. So this beautiful slide you see has a lot of story behind it. So And none of this should be that, unfamiliar to those in the startup community. And so I guess one of the first points I wanted to make here is that, and part of our story is that when you start off right with your business and your product, and things are very up in the air and uncertain, you'll have some opinions as how about many different things that are ultimately going to be proven wrong. So one of the first things that we learned was that actually for our product, we had expected it to be a very much like a self-service motion to start, meaning like we would generate all this inbound demand, which we did, and it worked really well. We have a really strong SEO game and have lots of inbound demand, but early on the product took some explaining. So for those of you not familiar with Tray, it's what we would call a general automation platform. It fits into kind of like the low code space, where we have a drag and drop interface where you can build integrations and sort of automate processes. And it's kind of like a, MacGyver's, SaaS best friend. Like you can pretty much do anything with it. But that, because you can do so much with it, it's a completely different paradigm to how you would do integrations and automations and things like that. It has a learning curve. It's extremely powerful, but again, like it takes somebody hearing someone's particular pain point or use case and then putting that in context for them. So when we started off, we had this free trial motion. We thought everybody would just pay, swipe their credit card and pay, and we'd have a very kind of lightweight sales organization and go to market model. But reality is that didn't happen. So we had all this inbound demand, but there was a missing step. And so what we had to do was iterate away from that model and go more to this model that you see on the left, which is, we had to build go to market fit, if that's a term, where it took some fairly heavy qualification of this large volume of inbound leads. And then we sort of went through each of these steps you see on the left, right, where an SDR is qualifying that lead. An AE then qualifies it again by getting on an intro call and understanding their use case. Then we introduce a sales engineer, right? Then we do co-devs and this fairly white glove process. But once we did that, once we kind of said, all right, forget about it. Like we don't need to do that to start. We're too early on as a company. Once we did that, then that's when our growth really started to happen. And then and that's really fed the business up to this point. And now that we've got, that growth and we've gotten the funding to invest in product and some of these other things, and we're finally ready to kind of go back. And that's actually where I'm working now, is we're coming back to that assumption that we originally had. And now that we have a stronger product experience, we have a stronger onboarding experience. And we better understand, who needs that white glove service. We can pivot to a different model and start really testing that out in an iterative fashion. So again, none of these concepts are necessarily, that unique as far as startups are concerned, right? Fail fast, pivot, try new things, experiment, all those sort of stuff. But we do it to your funnel, right? And your go-to-market motions and those sorts of things, and be, strong convictions, loosely held, whatever, right? Just be open to the fact that you may need to experiment there, and there's a time and a place for certain things, and you just gotta, you roll with the punches and work through that.
Actually, to that point, once you have this data coming in and you're able to understand how different leads actually end up going through your funnel and what is most qualified, you can start employing that in your stack. And we're going to talk about stacks a little bit later, I think. But for example, at Segment, when a visitor is on our site and is looking at our site, we actually look at that lead, enhance it with Clearbit data, and then do a Mad Kudu lead score. And based on that, we interact with that lead differently. We might open up a live chat window. We might offer them a direct contact with the salesperson, or we might send them, other information that's more just self-serve content. And that's based on what we're seeing coming through as the quality of these leads over time. And we adjust that over time too, based on how those folks actually fare through our funnel. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty awesome, and I want to jump into that a little bit more. But I know we're going to talk about tech stack later. But that's a pretty neat example. So getting into the kind of the next question that we wanted to go over a little bit was on key metrics, and I'd love to hear a little bit about as you're mapping out your customer journey and you start tracking all this data. What are some of the things you're doing with that information, and can you talk about some of the activation metrics that you look at in your businesses today? Like what are the key things that you're looking out for specific to your businesses?
I have far too much to say about metrics, so I'll try to hedge a little bit. Actually, if you can go to the next slide, one of the big things that I think is really important is understanding not just general metrics, but your growth KPI, understanding really what it is that you're aiming for. What is your biggest goal? So down at the bottom, you can see some of the focuses of some bigger startups that we've seen. For example, Airbnb is focused on having at least one booking or one stay per year. Facebook is looking for monthly active users. But then, for example, Facebook also has figured out deeper growth KPIs. So I believe it was adding at least 10 friends in 7 days. That means that user is going to stay around forever. And there's some KPIs means key performance indicator. And so I saw that the question came in, and PMF means product market fit. So these are really important in the growth of an early stage startup, which, all of you are startups as far as I know. Many of you are probably early stage startups. Now, these are really important things to understand early and look at often. The difficulty here is understanding if that growth is actually coming from the thing that it's correlated with. And I don't really have a great answer for you in terms of how to suss that out. But if you're able to see what it is that your growth is correlated to, then you're able to install growth KPI. And those growth KPI allow you to understand if your experiments and the changes that you're making are actually working even before the experiment is done. And that's why I really, and focusing in on this as something that's very important for early stage startups, because you don't have time to run an entire experiment and see how the outcome comes out. You need to be able to iterate while the experiment's already happening. So that way, by the time the experiment's done, you already know it's worked, and you already know what your next step is and are already working on that. So growth KPI really is one of the most important things, in my opinion, for an early stage startup specifically. There are plenty of other things that are very important to think about as well. After your first 3 core metrics that are based on your funnel, I would recommend focusing very clearly on your growth KPI. Thanks to all of you who are answering the question in the chat. Appreciate you helping to clarify. Teamwork makes the dream work. Yeah, Niels, any thoughts on that or anything to add?
Yeah, so when I started getting into the growth space, it was like the Eric Ries heyday of the lean startup, where he was peak popular. And I've been a big fan of one of the common sort of KPI sort of frameworks that he advocated for. And Brad, if we can go to the next slide, which they call pirate metrics. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but they call them pirate metrics because it's like R. And so those are acquisition, right? I think we should all be pretty familiar with that. You can think about that in terms of conversion rates from your site, all the sort of metrics that you might think about with acquisition, right? Like total traffic. You could even go a little further down funnel and think about your MQL rate. So MQL being a marketing qualified lead, right? So you get a lead in the door, but is it qualified, right? And then you can think about lead to MQL rates and things like that. And obviously, when something becomes a marketing qualified lead, that's when you would typically pass it over to sales. And those are all key metrics that we are pretty common to use. And you can find tons of content out there on that. Activation, particularly for, in my context, is pretty much exclusively software as a service, or SaaS, B2B SaaS. And so activation is a metric that we care a lot about now that we're sort of delving back into that self-service motion with a trial offer and things like that. And so you can have multiple tiers of these metrics even. So for activation, we have what we would call a level 1 activation and a level 2. And usually what that means is just that the customer has had some recognize some value with your product. So it's not that they just signed up, but they've actually demonstrated some demonstrable, value, gotten some demonstrable value from the product. So for us, like our level 1 activation is that they've built what we would call a workflow. So that they've sort of begun to build and like run workflows, right? So they're actually like, things are talking to one another, data's moving, like that sort of stuff. And that's where we want to get. So as soon as somebody comes into our trial, right, that's not good enough. We need to know what % of them actually makes it to level 1 activation, which is what you see here on the right? So you can literally see our whole self-service funnel here. We have what's called a gated trial, where we want to know a little bit of information before we extend the trial to someone. So we have requests, then invites sent. So what percentage of those requests did we actually invite? What % actually accepted the invite? And that's where we get into the activation phase. And then what % of those who accepted actually got to that level 1? And then our level 2 is essentially that they built that workflow and had it successfully running on a continuous basis. And a lot of that comes from our own usage data of our product. And so then what we do is we aim certain projects at increasing each of these metrics, right? So like we found out early on that our invite accept rate was kind of low. So we implemented 2 days worth of reminders, right? Of just like a day after we remind it, all of that's tracked through Segment. It all feeds into this dashboard and we can quickly see trend data on these things. If we could do the next slide, Brad. And then of course, revenue is another big part of the R metrics, right? Like how much money is coming in the door. You can think about that like from a pipeline perspective, how much dollars are being fed into the sales organization. So when something becomes a sales qualified opportunity at Tray, we count that as pipeline. And then that's a heavy metric that we use to evaluate our even our trial program, which is again more of a light touch self-service motion, but it helps us do an apples to apples comparison with our more white glove service. And we can go, okay, we're feeding all these commercial small businesses into this self-service motion, but how's that compared historically against our pipeline numbers for that, for that segment? And then you can obviously and should bring that to ARR or annual recurring revenue. And again, 2 tiers of one of these metrics where you can have 2 different views on it and sort of progressively get further down. So I just wanted to highlight those 2, both the framework and those first 3 kind of metrics as simple places to start, and try to share some dashboards of like how we're looking at this. For example, for our trial program, right? So we're looking at how much average weekly pipeline are we generating? How many requests are coming in the door? All this stuff is all fed, through to our data warehouse. And then we have a tool called Sisense that sits on top of it where we measure it.
Wow, that's pretty incredible stuff. I also have another slide here, Niels. I don't know if this one, maybe I should have flipped through to it a little quicker, but, or maybe, sorry, I already passed it, I guess. Okay, sorry. I got lost there. Well, neat. I think, kind of with that, I want to move into the next topic, which is the actual tools that you are using. This is always one of my favorite things because I'm always eager to learn about different technologies that are out there and that are making these things easier. And most importantly, and as a big theme in this discussion, is really just how those technologies interact with each other. And obviously, your 2 technologies play a large role in that, and would be interested to know how you're using that in your tech stacks.
Absolutely. It's pretty cool the type of magic that you can make these days with the different tools that are available to us. I picked out, 3 basic use cases for small stacks that you can put together. And I didn't want to focus too much on any specific business model. So I chose three that are kind of across the board, different types of business models. First thing, for your emails. Oftentimes we think of email as the event that happens at the end, but actually you can track your email events too. So if you have like Customer IO, that's a tool that I use very commonly. It's something that we think is really great for startups, especially because it's meant for that kind of SMB user. You can track email events like delivered, opened, clicked, unsubscribed, so on and so forth, and pipe that into Segment. And then from Segment, you can have it flow into your analytics tools like Amplitude, Mixpanel. You can also use Segment as the ETL tool. And so get that into BigQuery, where someone who has learned SQL can also go in and query what they need in terms of which users are interacting with your emails in what ways. Another really great opportunity for folks, especially who have B2C or an e-commerce or mobile model, is to have push events and customer user traits come into Segment, and then have it go through Customer IO or Autopilot if you'd like to, as well as Drift if you want in-app messaging. To power those customer messages based on the actual activity. And that way you can have it triggered based on the events. And this can be both pre-sales as people are interacting with your tool and getting them down the funnel, as well as post-sales to help with engagement and getting them to that next level of activation. Another really cool thing that I was kind of talking about previously, we do it a little bit differently than how I've written it here, but you can do Clearbit enrichment on any site visitors that are coming in, and then have that plug in through Segment to Customer IO, Autopilot, Drift, and have customized messaging. You know that this is a potential enterprise customer. You know that this is a potential, certain type of use case for your product. Whatever it is, you can have special messages that go out that are tried and tested. There's a bunch of other really cool ways to use. Excellent. There's a bunch of other really cool ways to use your stack. Clearbit has a lot of really cool opportunities for that if you're interested in using Clearbit. Another thing that you can do is you can use Autopilot to integrate with Salesforce through Segment. And this way you can really keep all of your fields synced up as people are interacting with your team and interacting with your tool. That's a really cool opportunity for you. That basically allows you to create a loop. And that's one of the cool things about Segment is you can create these data loops where everything is staying up to date as things are happening in different places. And then finally, one really cool thing especially for marketers is you can bring your ad spend from Facebook or Google into Segment and then ETL pipe that straight from Segment into your data warehouse. And that way you have your CAC and all of your spend information totally democratized for anyone who wants to go in and understand. So these are some really cool ways to use your stack, and really simple ways too, especially, just a quick plug, if you use Segment, then you've done the code of adding Segment, and then you wouldn't have to code to add any of these tools, and you can try them out with just a flip of a switch. So super simple, especially for an early stage startup to have what I call a big boy stack very easily.
Nice. And Niels, how about you? I guess this is what you set up.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was just put a stack in context. And so I think a lot of times you'll see like graphs, right? Like here's the 1,000 tools I use, and which is fine, right? Like we are very much, in a day and age where great best of breed products can be chosen because of tools like Segment, because of tools like Tray and Zendesk, right? Like, and part of your decision in choosing these tools, in my opinion, is that you choose them tools which are open, right? They have strong APIs, they have strong webhooks, right? They're tools that can be integrated, so and rather than like monolithic behemoth, everything all in one tools, right? I think that is one of the more interesting trends, right, that we have these days. And so what I wanted to share here was I'm going to share two quick sets of slides that talk about tools in context. So part of the remit of the growth team at Tray is we are essentially the technical arm of marketing. So we own both an engineering team, but we also own our ops function, our marketing ops function. And we own lead intake and routing. And so I'm going to talk about lead intake and routing. So we try to think about it less about tools and more about process of what are the key jobs to be done of lead management. And so this slide right here, oh, and I'm sorry, let me just put some quick context for the points on the side there. So when we think about segment, so a lot of people tend to think about it like clickstream tracking and like certain integrations, but you can really use segment for a bunch of different stuff. And like I pretty much use it in every single aspect of our RevOps workflow. So I use it for what I would call like workflow analytics, right? I'm taking snapshots of leads of before and after I'm enriching them. I'm taking snapshots of routing, the results of routing, where I'm saying who was assigned to, what team were they on, you name it. We're using Segment to track inside of our workflows, everything that happens inside of our go-to-market processes. And Tray is really like the orchestration engine there, right? Where you have to make certain logic choices on what to do when and why you should track something one way versus another, and you name it. And so in any case, here's an example of like intake. We get leads from a lot of places, right? We get it from our website, we get it from chat, we get it from list uploads, we get it from third parties, we get it through enrichment, we get it through event platforms, like you name it. Leads come in from all over the place. And what we've decided, and if you could just progress the slides, is that we're going to have a singular pipeline that all leads go through. We're not letting multiple systems create leads, which ends up causing duplicates and gaps in attribution and all sorts of operational problems. And instead, if we think about what has to happen every time you take a lead in, right? You have to validate, is it a real email? You have to make sure that an existing lead doesn't already exist in your CRM or your contact. You have to enrich it, right? Then you create it. You have to lead to account match it, right? So you have to go, okay, does this lead actually belong to some other account that's already exists in our system? If it does, convert it to a contact. You have to do attribution. You have to score it. You have to route it. You have to, sequence sales communications based on what they did. All this sort of stuff, these are the jobs to be done of lead management. And so one of the interesting things about like something like a Tray, where you have this sort of general automation platform, is that I'm not relegated to legacy tools that like marketing automation platforms, or having to use nothing but native integrations that end up causing all these other bag of worms problems. I can actually choose the best in breed vendors and put them in these little services. So for example, for validation, we use Clearbit Risk, which is an API that they have, and we have Never Bounce, which is just an email validation workflow. And I just send it an email. I send this little service an email address, and it responds back and it says, was it a personal email? Is it an actual valid email, right? Any of those things. And if I ever decide that Never Bounce isn't the right tool for me, I can easily swap it out, but my pipeline stays the same, right? I'm not having to use, I control what vendors I use, when and where. Same thing with enrichment. If I ever want to add another enrichment vendor who's particularly good at something, like we did with Lucia, right? We use them to get phone numbers. And we use those all in one central place. I can sort of take these pieces like Lego blocks and put them together and swap pieces out without necessarily blowing up the whole system, or having to deal with a series of little black boxes where I don't know what's happening inside those systems. I just have to trust somebody that they're going to work the way I want it to work. And so again, like if we ever decide we wanted to move away from outreach, I love the tool, and I don't think we would, but we could, right? And we just know exactly where to put it. Anyway, this is where I see tools like Segment and Tray just offering you the ability to do things that other systems maybe can't do, and why we need to learn all these technical skills. If we can go to the next slide, I'll give you another example. So we talked a lot about our trial process. And so we get trials from a number of different ways. We get them from, the primary sources are from a form on our website. Remember I said it was gated, so you have to request a trial. And we get it through an intercom chat bot where it's collecting the same questions as the form collects, but it's just a different tactic to which to collect trial requests. We collect those submissions through what's known as a webhook, where we get these data points and they flow into a Tray workflow, and which means I can get those requests from any other place I want. If I want to set up a partner channel and have them start offering trials, all I need is some data from them that answers a handful of questions, and I send it into this singular workflow, and the rest of this process just works. So for example, like when we get a trial request, what happens is the first thing we do is we put it through that lead pipeline I just showed you. And that thing processes it. I know it will route it. And then I just wait for that lead to get routed. And once it's routed, I create a Salesforce task and I assign it to the person who the lead was routed to. And and if that person, depending on the answers they gave us, if they're less technical, I Slack the owner with a Slack bot and I say, hey, you just got a trial request. Here's what this person wants to integrate. Here's their use case. What do you want to do? Approve or deny? And if they approve it, then that automatically creates an opportunity in Salesforce. And it puts all the details from their form submission into that opportunity. If they were more technical, and then I can just say, you know what, don't worry about it. It's less likely they'll need hand-holding. So I'm just gonna go ahead and automatically create that opportunity, send out the invite via SendGrid. And then the moment that they accept that event, right, or they accept the invite to our trial, which happens, we can tap into from a segment event, I can listen for that to happen, automatically progress the opportunity to stage 2, assign an account executive and a sales engineer, send out a welcome email via Intercom's API with a link that we grabbed via Chili Piper's API to book a meeting with that, offering a meeting booking with that prospect, just to introduce the AE essentially. And I can automatically register them for a Zoom webinar like we're all sitting on right now. All of this is, again, tools in context. And so, and all of this is possible because, again, these platforms are open, and in learning these skills, learning to be able to sort of speak the language of the open platforms is again, very critical. And then finally, as they begin clicking and using these products, again, we're tracking all the clickstream data with Segment. We're sending it all over to Redshift. I can just query Redshift periodically. And then if I see that somebody's engaging with the trial, hey, account executive, this person is heating up, right? Like they're starting to log in a lot more. They're starting to use more of the product. You should focus on them. And I can do that via Slack using automation and not having to have that person go log into Salesforce and go see what's happening or some custom report that was built, right? Like I can do it in real time. And that is how you punch above your weight as a small organization by again, investing in these skills and these types of tools. You can act a lot bigger and be a lot more agile than some of your bigger competitors, because you don't have the bureaucracy even. Like the bureaucracy is half the time what kills people, right? So just again, like learning these skills is pretty critical.
That's great. And speaking of bureaucracy, do you guys think you could come in and do this for Zendesk? Because we definitely do not have anything. I know we're really sophisticated about this stuff, and this is just kind of a key point. And what we'll get into is in terms of key learnings. But for me, you know, one of the lessons learned since joining Zendesk is, you know, as you get to become a larger organization, you can really get locked into a lot of these tools. And what's beautiful about being a startup right now is you're building with tools that are super flexible. They all interact with each other. And to your point, Niels, you can just rip and replace something if you're not liking it, or if the next best thing comes along. So, you know, maybe at some point there's an email sequencing tool that's better than Outreach that comes along, and you know, it's not going to be as painful to rip it out and replace it for you as it is for us to change anything, you know, at a large organization like a Zendesk. So definitely one of the great things about being a smaller company these days. And with that, I do want to jump in and you know, we want to make some time for Q&A and also give you guys both a shot at just kind of what are some of the key takeaways that you want people to walk away from this conversation with, you know, if they remember nothing else besides your beautiful slides.
Absolutely. I think, Niels, do you want to kick us off with the first one?
Yeah. So this kind of ties back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is like, I, maybe it's a little, aspirational, but I love this idea of like the quantified organization, right? So because we're so software driven, and because we have these tools that are more accessible, and have a common language between them, which is basically JSON data, right? You can track everything about it, and that is not to say just go do that, right? But by having those skills in hand, you can do it strategically and slowly and pick where everything is. Like I had mentioned the example of us snapshotting leads before and after enrichment. So we do both programmatic and manual enrichment. Well, the reason we do that or did that was because we weren't sure, like, do we have the right manual enrichment vendor? And so by snapshotting that information, we can go, okay, well, this particular vendor does really good at giving us this particular attribute, job title. But they kind of are not that great at phone number. So let's and I know that because I take those snapshots and I said, you know what, like we need to be able to make these evaluations and provide that feedback and make more informed decisions, not just the vendor that XYZ person brought in with them because they used them 10 times before in the previous company and they know it works. No, we quantify every aspect of our operations. Therefore, we can make actual data informed decisions. Again, like you don't have to think about this purely from a like what is the person doing in our app or our product or on the website, right? You can think about the operations of your own business, and because data is more accessible and cheaper, then the instrumentation mindset can apply to many different aspects of your business.
Absolutely. And to that point, it's important to get that measurement culture into your company's DNA very early. Understanding what metrics everything's going to move is the first step to that, but really understanding that that data is available to everybody because it has been set up, and that when you are establishing a new initiative, a new project, you should be thinking about that data first too. Understanding not just how you're going to be measuring the outcome of that project, but also understanding what it is that you're trying to look at in terms of the customer's journey. It still all goes back to that story, but understanding how to measure that story and how to recreate that story down the line, that's something that you have to put into the DNA of your company. And also in terms of mindsets, even if you're a very small startup, we're in a paradigm right now where there are a lot of resources out there. And you can get a lot of tools and a lot of cool things very, very cheaply or even for free. You just have to be kind of innovative about it, a little creative about it. So you might be resourcing like a small company, but those resources can actually get you the stack and get you the types of mechanisms that big companies have. There's very little difference, in my opinion, these days between what a small company and a big company can do with lead scoring, with nurture, with getting people through the funnel. Is just a matter of innovation. And in fact, I think that small companies have an advantage over bigger companies because you can just do it and you can experiment early and often without asking a lot of questions and worrying about failing too badly.
I 100% agree with that sentiment. And I think that's kind of sort of ties nicely into this last point, which is like the people that are in some of these organizations are beginning to look very different. And I think they start in some of these smaller companies where you don't have some of that baggage, right? From an operations context, like more of a RevOps kind of context, like the trend that I sort of noticed when I first got into B2B SaaS is like you have your system experts, right? Here's your Marketo admin, here's your Salesforce admin, here's your tool admin, whatever. And I think that's a flawed model going forward. I think you should think more about technologists and people who understand REST and people who understand SQL and people who understand putting those types of technical skill sets in the hands of people on the front lines and in the business side, right? Makes them far more powerful and self-reliant and less learned helplessness and more satisfied with their jobs. I've seen it happen firsthand, like taught several people on my team a lot of these skill sets, and it's just a much more rewarding feeling. And I think we should, again, not shy away from that. And people will see that more and more as these tools become more accessible.
Thanks, guys. This has been amazing, and really appreciate you joining me here. You're a great duo, and made my job really easy moderating here. We're going to get into some Q&A with what little time we do have. I know we're running up against the clock. I do want to make sure that as we're doing that you do also get a chance to talk a little about some of the offers that you have available for your products. So let's jump into that real quick, and then as we're doing that, we'll monitor the chat for questions.
So with regards to segment, one thing I wanted to mention is that if you are an early stage startup, segment is effectively free for you. We're giving 50K in segment credits for anyone who's less than 2 years old, less than $5 million in funding. This is the program that I run. If you apply at bit.ly/ZD-Tray20, we'll make sure to get you a higher level of credits than we typically offer because you're a part of this, this particular event. We'll make sure to get you over $1 million in different partner deals as well, so you can build that big boy stack very cheaply or even for free. And we'll have mentorship sessions and best practice sessions available to you. Additionally, we have other events coming up like the CDP week that Segment is putting on. You can reach out to me anytime and I can get you a little discount code for that too. You can find me LinkedIn and anywhere else that people exist. Anyway, looking forward to having you as part of our program.
Right. I just added that to our chat here.
Cool. So yeah, I run our trial program at Tray. If you go to tray.io/request trial, we'll get you set up on a 14-day. If you need a little extra time, just reach out and we can extend it for you. You can sort of play around with some of these ideas that we've been talking about of low code and general automation. Yeah, hope to see you there.
Okay, let's get into some questions that we have real quick before wrapping up. It looks like we had one, or maybe you answered already, but what software, Anand, that you use to push the data into Segment?
Absolutely, yeah, CR, great question. You asked about democratizing your CAC and other marketing metrics. You asked what software we use. So if you feed that all into Segment, Segment has two sides to it. There's the sources for data and then the destinations. So if you have your Google ads, Facebook Pixel, all as your sources for Segment, then we'll pull that all in, we'll unify it into user records and then send it downstream to really any types of destinations that you want. The way I would do it personally is pipe it into a data warehouse like Redshift or Snowflake, and then on top of that, put a BI tool and make sure everyone knows SQL. Really, I'm a huge fan of SQL. Everyone should know SQL. And then they can query themselves. You can also create, of course, dashboards and things like that that are available to everyone. That's particularly helpful if you have an analytics person on board. You can simplify that a bit and have it go directly into like an Amplitude or a mixed panel as well, and just have those dashboards set up. And that's a really great way to democratize that data. And then the middle ground, just FYI, Chartio, I kind of think of as this middle ground between the Amplitude and those analytics tools and a bigger BI tool. Chartio is a really fantastic opportunity for earlier stage startups as well that might not have a dedicated analytics person. That's my opinion though. Hope that answers your question. Yeah. Perfect.
Anyone else want to just jump in? If you have any questions, go ahead. And if not, we can close it out, and maybe Greg, you can take us home.
Well, first and foremost, just outstanding. I just wanted to give a monster thank you to Anand, Brad, Niels, and our entire Zendesk family. I mean, it absolutely takes a village to get these things done, and the amount of work that goes into these is a lot. So a monster thank you to everyone involved. Again, as we said earlier, right, the meetups, magnifying people's voices and giving, education at scale. And then ultimately, Slack allows for kind of real-time engagement. So for those who, it's amazing to see how much overlap there is between our Slack community and those who attended here. for those who attended, if you wouldn't mind shooting maybe a lesson learned from this event in the Slack community, specifically in the best practices channels, so we can share the learnings. And for those who aren't yet in the channel or aren't in the Slack community, I will be sending a follow-up email for you to join. So again, a monster thank you. It's just outstanding. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.